A quiet afternoon turned into a showdown when his family showed up with a wedding contract they had secretly prepared. "Sign this," his father ordered. "Our wives follow our rules." My husband shifted uncomfortably and said, "It's just tradition." I smiled, took the papers, and pulled out my own set of documents. "Great. Then you'll have no problem signing this first." The second he read the first line, his hands trembled, and his parents went silent. A quiet afternoon turned into a showdown when his family showed up with a wedding contract they had secretly prepared. "Sign this," his father ordered. "Our wives follow our rules." My husband shifted uncomfortably and said, "It's just tradition." I smiled, took the papers, and pulled out my own set of documents. "Great. Then you'll have no problem signing this first." The second he read the first line, his hands trembled, and his parents went silent. I thought I was going to have a quiet Sunday. That's what I had planned, just a slow morning, maybe some coffee, maybe catching up on emails. But instead, I found myself sitting across from my in-laws as they pushed a stack of papers in front of me, telling me to sign my own life away. I looked at my husband, Mark. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His father, Richard, sat across the table, arms crossed, waiting. His mother, Eleanor, sipped her tea like this was just another casual afternoon. And then Richard said it again. "Sign this." I picked up the papers and started reading. It was a contract, a legally binding contract. At first, I thought maybe it was about something financial, something to do with the family business, maybe an inheritance clause. But no, it was worse. It was a set of rules. Rules for me. It outlined exactly what my life would have to look like from now on. I would quit my job immediately and become a full-time wife. I would hand over all my personal savings and assets to Mark. I would never deny my husband's requests for anything. And yes, the wording was vague on purpose. If I ever wanted a divorce, I would leave with nothing. No house, no car, no bank accounts, nothing. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. They had lawyers draft this. I turned to Mark, waiting for him to say something. Anything. A joke, maybe. Some kind of reassurance that this was just a misunderstanding. Instead, he cleared his throat. "It's just tradition." Mark's family came from old money, Texas oil wealth. They were obsessed with their traditions, their image, their power. Before we got married, I knew they were conservative, but I didn't think much of it. I grew up independent, worked my way up in my career, handled my own finances. I assumed Mark was different from them. He said he was different. He promised me he wanted an equal marriage, that he had no interest in their outdated ways. He told me I could keep my job, my independence, my choices. And now here I was, sitting in my own home, being told by his father that I had no choices at all. Richard leaned back in his chair. "It's for the good of the family," he said. "All our wives follow these rules." Eleanor nodded as if this was just normal. Mark still wouldn't look at me. His hands were folded on the table, his jaw tight. That's when it hit me. He knew. He knew they were going to do this. He had known for days, maybe weeks, and he let it happen. I set the papers down slowly. "Okay," I said. His father smirked, like he thought I was giving in. I stood up, walked down the hall to my office, and came back with my own stack of documents. I set them on the table right on top of theirs. "Then you'll have no problem signing this first." Mark's forehead creased. "What's this?" "My contract," I said. "If I have to sign one, so do you." Richard frowned, but reached for the top page, scanning the words. I saw the exact moment he realized what it was. His hand stiffened. His lips pressed into a thin line, and then, silence. My contract was just as legally binding as theirs. If I quit my job, Mark had to pay me my full salary out of his own pocket every year for life. If he ever cheated, I would get everything: our house, our assets, our investments. Any attempt by his parents to control my finances would result in a $500,000 penalty paid directly to me. If his family disrespected me, they were cut off permanently. No visits, no calls, no contact. Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Eleanor put down her teacup, her knuckles white. "Richard?" He ripped their contract in half. "We're not signing this nonsense," he snapped. I shrugged. "Oh. But you thought I would sign yours?" More silence. I turned to Mark. "Are you really going to let them try to control me like this?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. He looked at his mother, then his father, then back at me. That hesitation? That silence? That was my answer. I stood up. "All right then." I left the contract sitting on the table and walked out of the room. Mark followed me. "Wait," he said, grabbing my arm. "Just wait." "For what?" I asked, pulling free. "You let them do this. You didn't even warn me." His eyes darted back to the kitchen. I thought we could talk about it first." "We're talking now," I said. He sighed. "Look, they pressured me into this, okay? It wasn't my idea. But you didn't stop them. He ran a hand through his hair. I thought maybe we could compromise. I stared at him. Compromise? How about, he said quickly, we change a few things in the contract. I'll talk to them. We can remove some of the harsher rules. I laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sharp, bitter one. No, I said. We can't change a few things. I walked upstairs, packed a bag, and left. Mark called me that night. He left voicemail after voicemail, begging me to come home. He told me he didn't mean for it to go that far, that he was sorry. I told him I'd think about coming back if he cut them off completely. The next day, he flew to Texas to apologize to them instead. Mark was gone for 3 days. He didn't call, didn't text. The man who had spent weeks trying to get me to marry him, who had promised me we were a team, who had told me over and over again that I was his priority, chose them instead. I waited, but deep down, I already knew what this meant. Then, on the 4th day, he finally called. Hey, he said, his voice softer than usual. I want to talk. Can I come over? I should have said no, but some stupid part of me needed to hear what he had to say. He showed up that evening, looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He walked in like a man with a confession to make. I'm sorry, he said. I should have stopped them. I should have warned you. I waited. I was stuck between you and them. My father, he's not the kind of man you say no to. I crossed my arms. You just did. You ripped up his contract. That's different. He rubbed his face. Look, I don't want to lose you. I told them that. I told them they were out of line. I almost believed him. Almost. And then he said the words that made my stomach turn. They agreed to change a few things. I felt ice in my veins. You went back and negotiated? He hesitated. I wanted to find a middle ground. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had no right to demand anything in the first place, I said, my voice rising. This wasn't a business deal. This was my life. I know, he said quickly. That's why he pulled out another envelope. Just look at this. Okay? Please. I took the papers from his hands, and as I read, my heart pounded in my ears. It was still a contract. Some of the language had changed, sure. It didn't say I had to quit my job immediately, just that I had to consider transitioning into a more family-focused role. It didn't say I had to give up my money, but it did suggest a joint financial restructuring where Mark would become the primary decision-maker on all major expenses. And that awful, vague wording about me never refusing my husband, it was still there, just buried under softer phrases about prioritizing mutual respect. I looked up at him. Are you serious? He had the nerve to look relieved. So you'll sign? I dropped the papers on the table. No, I said. His face darkened. It's just paperwork. It doesn't change anything between us. The hell it doesn't. For the first time in my life, I saw who Mark really was. A man who wanted control but didn't want to admit it. A man who would let his parents dictate our marriage and call it compromise. A man who would rather negotiate my rights away than stand up for me. I wasn't dealing with a weak man. I was dealing with a coward. I grabbed my purse. Get out. Mark stiffened. You're overreacting. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Get out. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head, but he left, and I locked the door behind him. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Mark, we need to talk. I ignored it. An hour later, another text. Mark, this is getting ridiculous. Can we be adults about this? I blocked his number. That afternoon, I got an email. It was from his father. Subject, final offer. I clicked on it. You have 1 week to reconsider. If you refuse to cooperate, we will pursue legal action to protect our family's interests. Legal action? Against me? I left. They thought they could scare me. They thought I would cave. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That evening, I called my lawyer. I had no idea what kind of nonsense they planned to pull, but I wasn't about to sit around waiting for it. I went to bed feeling oddly calm. If they wanted a fight, I was ready. But the next day, I got another surprise. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an email. It was a message from my best friend, Claire. Claire, who had been in my wedding. Claire, who had listened to me vent about Mark's family for years. Claire, who I trusted. Claire, hey. Weird question. Did you tell Mark you were thinking of hiring a lawyer? I frowned and typed back. Me? No. Why? She hesitated. Then, Claire, because his mom just called me. She said you were acting out and that they were worried you might do something rash. She wanted to know if I had any influence over you. I sat up straight. Me? You're joking. Claire. I wish I was. She wanted me to talk some sense into you before you ruined your marriage. My hands curled into fists. They weren't just pressuring me. They were trying to turn my own friends against me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rage building in my chest. Me? What did you say, Claire? I told her to go damn herself. I left. A real, genuine laugh. At least I still had some people on my side. But this meant one thing. They weren't done. They were just getting started. I knew Mark's family would keep pushing. I knew they wouldn't just let me go, but I underestimated just how far they would go. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my bank. Unusual activity detected on your joint account. I frowned. I hadn't touched that account in weeks. I logged in and felt my stomach drop. Mark had transferred out every single dollar. Everything. Gone. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number straight to voicemail. I called the bank next. The woman on the other end sounded sympathetic but firm. Your husband is the primary account holder, ma'am. He had full rights to move the money. I clenched my jaw. He wasn't just stalling. He was trying to trap me. I had my own accounts, of course. I wasn't stupid enough to rely only on a joint one. But this was a warning. A message. They were trying to make me financially dependent. I closed my laptop. Fine. If this was how they wanted to play it, I'd play right back. I went straight to my lawyer's office. She skimmed through my documents, clicking her tongue. This is bad, she muttered. They're setting up a case that you're financially reckless, which means if this goes to court, they'll argue that Mark should control all marital assets. I blinked. That's insane. She gave me a grim smile. Welcome to divorce warfare. I exhaled, trying to steady my breathing. So what do we do? She leaned back. First, we secure your assets. Anything in your name alone, we make sure it stays there. Second, we hit back before they escalate. We file for divorce before they file against you. I hesitated. Wouldn't that make it look like I was the one giving up? She shook her head. No. It puts you in control. If they file first, they can frame the story however they want. If you file first, we dictate the terms. I nodded slowly. Do it. She pulled out the paperwork. One more thing, she said. We should move fast. I have a feeling they're not done. She was right. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. And another. Finally, I answered. Hello. A woman's voice came through, shaky and nervous. Is this my name? I frowned. Who is this? A pause. Then, I'm sorry. I didn't know you and Mark were still together. He told me you two had separated months ago. My stomach twisted. Who are you? I don't want to cause drama. I thought you should know. I've been seeing him for a while. He said he was single. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. How long? Since last summer. I gripped the phone tighter. Do you have proof? A ping. A text came through with screenshots. Text from Mark. Pictures. Dates. Hotel reservations. It was all there. Months of it. But here's the thing. It was fake. I recognized the hotel names, places Mark had traveled to for work. The text had weird formatting, like they'd been edited. And the photos? The woman was real, but Mark's face was always slightly blurred, like it had been copied from another image. This wasn't just some random affair. This was a setup. They were trying to frame me as the scorned, unstable wife, the kind of woman who would get emotional, act recklessly, maybe even make a financial mistake out of anger. It was a trap, but they had underestimated me. Instead of reacting, I played along. I texted back. Can we meet? I just want to understand. The woman agreed. I met her at a coffee shop the next day. She was young, early 20s, nervous, too polished, the kind of nervous that doesn't come from guilt but from rehearsing a lie. I acted devastated, let her ramble, and then, when she finally let her guard down, I leaned in. You're a terrible liar, I whispered. Her eyes widened. I smiled. Who paid you? Mark's parents or Mark himself? She froze, and just like that, I knew I was right. She wasn't a mistress. She was an actress. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of her shocked face. Thanks for your time, I said. Then I walked away. That night, I sent Mark a message. Tell your parents the next time they try to frame me. They better be smarter about it. No response. I waited. An hour later, my lawyer called. You're not going to believe this, she said. Mark's lawyer just sent over a counteroffer. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, they're offering a clean divorce. No financial claims. No court battles. They just want you to sign and walk away. I frowned. That didn't make sense. They had been so determined to trap me. Why back down now? Then I realized, they were scared. They had pushed too hard, tried too many dirty tricks, and they knew that if I kept digging, I'd find something worse. They wanted me to disappear before I exposed them, but I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't take the bait. I didn't sign their clean divorce offer because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't leaving quietly. They wanted to sweep everything under the rug. They wanted me to disappear before I could do any damage, but I wasn't the type to walk away without answers. So I did what they feared most. I went to Texas. Mark's family's estate was exactly what you'd expect. Massive, sterile, and built to impress. I wasn't invited, but I walked through the front doors anyway. A housekeeper gasped when she saw me. Mrs. My last name. I mean, Miss. I cut her off. Where are they? She hesitated, eyes darting toward the sitting room. I followed her gaze and pushed the doors open. Richard, Eleanor, and Mark were all there, talking, planning, plotting. They froze when they saw me. Mark stood up first. What are you doing here? I dropped my purse onto the table, figuring out why you suddenly want me to leave so badly. Richard sighed, rubbing his temples like I was an inconvenience, not a person. You had a chance to take the offer and walk away with your dignity. I crossed my arms. Oh, my dignity's just fine. Yours, though. I tilted my head. Not so much. Eleanor set down her tea, her usual calm mass cracking. This is unnecessary, dear. What's done is done. I left. No. What's done is about to be undone. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. I hit play, and the recording started. It was the conversation I had recorded with the mistress. Every word, every slip-up, every second of her stammering when she realized I knew she was lying. Eleanor's face drained of color. Richard's expression didn't even change. And Mark, he looked at me like he had never seen me before. I leaned forward. So let me get this straight. You faked an affair, stole money from our joint account, tried to frame me as unstable, and now you're offering me a kind divorce to shut me up. Richard folded his hands on the table. We did what we had to do. Mark flinched. Dad, no. Richard snapped, finally losing his cool. She doesn't get to waltz in here and act like she's one of us. Silence. I felt it then, the real truth underneath all of this. It was never about Mark. Not really. It was about control. They had spent decades building their world, one where they controlled their image, their wealth, their wives, and I had ruined it because I wasn't obedient. I wasn't scared of them, and worst of all, I wasn't leaving quietly. I smiled. Not a warm smile, a dangerous one. You think I came here to beg? I asked. I didn't. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Richard opened it. His face went stone cold. It was a lawsuit. Financial abuse. Fraud. Defamation. I turned to Mark. You emptied our account? My lawyers already filed to recover every cent. I turned to Eleanor. You hired someone to fake an affair? Defamation lawsuit incoming. I turned to Richard. And you? You tried to control me with contracts and threats. I smiled. You're about to find out what real consequences feel like. Silence. Then, Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. You wouldn't dare, he hissed. I stood up too, unshaken. Oh, Richard. I leaned in. I already did. His jaw clenched. This will destroy Mark. I turned to my husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband. Mark, do you really think your father cares about you? Mark didn't answer. Wake up, I said. He's not protecting you. He's using you. Just like he's using your mother. Just like he tried to use me. Eleanor flinched like I had slapped her. Mark finally spoke. You set me up, he whispered. His father turned to him, face unreadable. You let me believe the affair was real, Mark continued, voice shaking. You lied to me. Richard didn't deny it. Didn't even try. Because in his mind, it wasn't a lie. It was just necessary. Mark looked broken, but it was too late for him. I grabbed my purse. I'll see you in court. Then I turned and walked out. And this time, nobody stopped me. The lawsuit made headlines. Mark's parents settled quietly, desperately, throwing money at me to make it go away. Mark tried to apologize, but by then, I was done listening. And me? I walked away with everything they thought they could take from me. Not just money. Not just my dignity. My freedom. I used to think love was enough. That if two people cared about each other, they could get through anything. I don't believe that anymore. Because love without respect isn't love. And marriage without trust isn't a marriage. So I moved on. I built a new life. One where no one, not a husband, not a father-in-law, not anyone would ever have power over me again. And if Mark ever wonders what went wrong, he can just look in the mirror because in the end, he didn't just lose me. He lost himself.